You ever get that feeling that you're on a quest for something more? You know, that feeling of being totally in sync, just firing on all cylinders. Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. The quest for what some people call the optimal experience.
So think about this for a second. Have you ever been so completely absorbed in something, maybe it's playing an instrument or getting lost in code or even just going for a run, that the world around you just kind of disappears? You look up and bam, hours have flown by. That feeling, that's what we're talking about. That's our starting line for this whole discussion. All right, so let's get into it. That feeling of being totally lost in the moment. It's not just a fluke. Turns out psychologists actually have a name for this. They call it the optimal experience.
And what's kind of wild is that this whole idea of focusing on what makes us feel good is, well, it's pretty new in the grand scheme of things. For the longest time, psychology was all about diagnosing problems, fixing what was wrong. But then things started to change, big time. In 1990, you have Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi publishing his groundbreaking book Flow, and then, just a few years later, Martin Seligman formally kicks off this whole new field called positive psychology. It really flipped the script.
And really, this all comes back to a huge question, one we've probably all asked ourselves at some point. We all say we want to be happy, but what does that even mean? Is it just about pleasure, or is it something deeper? Well, these researchers were on a mission to answer that, but with a twist. They wanted to use science to do it.
Which brings us to the absolute core idea from Csikszentmihalyi's work. It's a word I'm pretty sure you've heard thrown around a lot: flow.
And when you read Csikszentmihalyi's definition, it's pretty powerful. Flow is when you are so completely immersed in an activity that everything else just vanishes. Your worries, the time, the noise, it all just fades away. And the key thing is, you're not doing it for some reward or because someone told you to. You're doing it for the sheer sake of doing it. He actually called it flow because that's the word people kept using to describe the feeling, like being carried along by a river.
I mean, who doesn't want more of that in their life, right? And the benefits, they're massive. Yeah, there's a real sense of happiness, but it's more than that. We're talking about a huge boost in productivity, hitting your peak performance, and this laser-like focus on the now. It's the ultimate in-the-zone feeling. Okay, so the big question is, how do we find this state? Is there a secret formula? Well, Csikszentmihalyi basically gave us a recipe with 4 key ingredients. First, you need a challenge, but it has to be one that really pushes your skills. It can't be too easy or you'll get bored. Second, you need total, absolute concentration, no distractions. Third, you've got to have clear goals and get immediate feedback. You need to know if you're on the right track right now. And last but not least, you feel this sense of complete control over what you're doing. And this quote right here from Tal Ben-Shahar just hits the nail on the head. It's all about the idea that the activity is its own reward. Csikszentmihalyi had a technical term for this. He called it autotelic, but the idea is so simple. It means the happiness isn't just waiting for you at the top of the mountain. The happiness is the climb. The journey itself is the whole point.
All right, so let's zoom out a little bit, because this idea of flow, as cool as it is, didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It actually became a really important piece of a much bigger puzzle, a whole new movement in science.
And that movement was positive psychology. It was founded in 1998 with this really radical goal: to stop focusing only on what's wrong with people and to start scientifically studying what makes life worth living. It's all about building on our strengths. Now that's an amazing goal, right? But it also opens up a huge can of worms. It leads to this really tricky question. Can you actually measure something as personal, as messy, as complicated as happiness with science? I mean, can you really slap a number on a feeling like joy? And that very question is what leads us to our next section, a more critical look at this whole idea. This phrase here really gets to the heart of the critique. Academics started to push back and ask, hey, wait a minute, is this really new? Or is this just old wine in new bottles? Basically, are we just taking ancient wisdom, ideas from philosophers like Aristotle, or from Eastern traditions like Buddhism, and just rebranding it with a shiny new scientific label?
So let's break this debate down a bit. You've got the promise of positive psychology on one hand, which is huge, right? To actually measure happiness, create a kind of manual for well-being, and fix psychology's old focus on just the negative. But on the other hand, the critics have some really strong points. Like, how do you even agree on a definition for happiness? And can we really trust people's answers on a survey to capture it?
Not to mention, it seems to ignore how much our culture and society affect how we feel.
And a really central part of this critique comes down to this one big word, reification. Now, it sounds complicated, but the idea behind it is pretty straightforward. It's when you take an abstract concept, like happiness, and you start treating it like a concrete thing, something you can measure and track like your blood sugar. Critics argue that this is what positive psychology does. It tries to quantify joy, and in the process, it risks turning a deeply personal human experience into just another number on a spreadsheet.
So, okay, if the intense focus of flow isn't the whole story, and if the whole science of happiness thing has some serious questions around it, where do we go from here? Well, that brings us to a third way of looking at all this, a path that's maybe less about doing and more about just being. This is the power of awareness.
And to really get this, we've got to understand that there are basically two different flavors of well-being. On one side, you have hedonic well-being. This is the fun stuff, right? The pleasure, the enjoyment. Think of a great concert or a delicious meal. It's about feeling good. But then there's eudaimonic well-being. This is different. This is about meaning and purpose and growth. Think about the challenge of learning a new skill or the deep satisfaction of working on something you believe in. It's not always fun in the moment, but it's what makes life feel rich and fulfilling.
This is exactly where a concept like mindfulness comes in. Now I know, it's a word that gets thrown around everywhere these days, but the actual definition is incredibly simple and powerful. It's just about paying attention, in a specific way, on purpose, to the present moment, and this is the key part, non-judgmentally. It's not about clearing your mind of all thoughts. It's about being aware of what's happening as it's happening without getting carried away by it. And there's some solid research to back this idea up. For example, one study found that people who practice mindfulness tend to report higher levels of that eudaimonic well-being we just talked about, that sense of meaning and purpose. So it's not just about chasing a fleeting good mood. It's about cultivating a deeper, more stable sense of fulfillment and awareness.
Phew, okay, we have covered a lot of ground here. So let's try to pull all these threads together and maybe turn this whole question back on ourselves. What does well-being actually mean to you?
So if you think about it, we've looked at three really distinct ways to think about this stuff. First, you have the path of flow, finding that happiness through getting lost in a challenge and peak performance. Then, you have the path of the critic, the one that says, hold on, let's question whether we can or even should try to standardize this stuff. And finally, there's the path of awareness, finding well-being not in doing, but in just paying attention, right here and right now.
And I think if there's one big takeaway from all of this, it's pretty clear. There is no single instruction manual for a good life. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Which of course brings it all right back to you. When you think about this balance between performance, purpose, and just being present, where do you find your well-being? Which path resonates the most with you? Definitely something to chew on.